I'm Rod Beckstrom, President and CEO of ICANN. I will interpret your attendance here as an expression of your interest in and a better understanding of what ICANN is doing on behalf of the world's 2 billion users of the Internet in our function with the domain name system. From what I've seen during my several days here in San Jose, that interest extends across Costa Rica. By the close of our pre-registration for this meeting on Friday, more than 1,700 participants had signed up to attend, including more than 600 right here in Costa Rica. And I think the President's statement that this event was of public interest to Costa Rica certainly helped these attendance figures. And we see many more registering this morning. And that interest, of course, extends all the way up to President Chinchilla, who honored her with her presence this morning at the welcoming ceremony. She's developed exceptional understanding of the complex issues that we at ICANN discuss and debate every day. It was a very impressive presentation, one that I believe ranks among the very best ever delivered at an ICANN meeting. As I said, many of these issues are complex, and we welcome the opportunity to discuss these issues with all of you. And with that, we open to your questions.
Hi guys, Kevin Murphy, Domain Insight and the Register. I was wondering if you could explain specifically why ICANN's response to the IANA contract RFP was not deemed adequate, and if for some reason you can't explain that, could you tell us why you can't explain that?
I think, as you know, the rules of bidding for the contract state that we have no comment on this issue and can only refer you to the Department of Commerce website and their statements. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Remy Nweke. I'm the editor of IT Realms Online from Nigeria, Lagos. I have a couple of questions, which I'll try to limit to two here. When you were making your presentation, sir, your report precisely, you told us that ICANN, though a small organization, has about 150 staff worldwide, and now ICANN has also introduced a new GTLD. Are we looking at increasing the workforce, or is ICANN being really pinched with the number of workforce it has presently? And then, secondly, you also made mention of pressures on the organization, politically, ethically, financially, and operational-wise. I would like to know what precisely are the kind of pressures you are getting. Is it from the government, or is it from interest organization? I would like you to throw more light on that. Thank you.
On the first question with respect to size, we will add additional headcount to the organization modestly to support the new GTLD program. I think that in the current plans, for example, the exact headcount number is around 137, 138 right now, with roughly 17 open positions that we're hiring. But most of the new GTLD work will be handled by outsourced application processors and panels that make decisions on objections, for example. So very little of the hiring is done inside of ICANN because it's a temporary program, or it has a certain duration and length. So it would not be appropriate to add all the headcount to ICANN to handle the application programming. But I think that historically the domain name industry has continued to grow, and ICANN is a nonprofit organization but derives most of its support from fees from domain name registries in the generic top-level domain space, such as .com, .net, .org registrations, also from registrars in the generic space. So that continues to grow every year. So as I shared recently with some members of the board, I think it's a very reasonable forecast that the minimum number of employees likely in a few years out is 200, and the number could certainly be higher depending upon how large the new GTLD program is and how many new top-level domains come into the root of the internet, and also depending upon the organic growth in domain name registration fees. That's on your first. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, you have a further?
I just want to do an add-on. I would like to have your take on there are some agitations that ICANN should actually be under UN. And I would like to have your take on that, as well as Mr. Chairman's input on that. And equally, the .Africa, I would like to know the state of applications you have received from African interest. Thank you.
So Steve, first he had an operating question, so I'll answer that.
Okay, go ahead.
And then have you answer the other piece. So with respect to the general pressures you mentioned, ICANN faces and always has faced pressures from many different constituencies and communities all over the world, because decisions do have to get made at the end of the day. For example, about whether a top-level domain is entered into the internet, or whether there's a redelegation made somewhere in the world, and over policy discussions and debates or contract discussions and debates, such as we see with the Registrar Accreditation Agreement this week. That's been a negotiation or discussion ongoing intensively since our meeting in Dakar last fall. And there's many different parties that have very strong and differing opinions on that kind of a topic. So ICANN exist under what I call a crucible of tectonic pressures, and pressures from many different groups around the world that have an interest in the domain name system because it touches so much of the world today. And so the operations have to run independently of that and run fairly and support the stakeholder discussions and debates, but remain fair and impartial and accurately follow the policies developed by the community and approved by the board, as well as a strategic plan developed with the community and approved by the board. With respect to your question on the United Nations, I think Dr. Crocker can share some information.
I don't have anything really definitive to say, but on the one hand, it's in some ways a positive thing to see that our small, modest operation is looked at with from such an august body. The UN interest is, of course, a complicated process. It's got its positive aspects, and it also has some challenges with respect to the multi-stakeholder model that is so deeply embedded in ICANN and the mode of operation that we have versus the typical way that UN and UN bodies approach the way of dealing with international issues. So there's nothing specific to say except that we pay close attention, of course, and we try to work with all of the parties who might be interested. That's part of an extended process. There is no quick answers here. It just takes a while to engage parties, have discussions, try to understand what issues are underneath their initiatives and their motivations, and see how these things evolve.
This is Eric Engelman, Bloomberg News in Washington. Rod, can you tell me if, just to confirm that ICANN submitted a proposal to NTIA for the new contract, just in general terms? And then I also had a question about the number of applicants ICANN has seen thus far for the new GTLD program. I saw in your earlier comments at the welcome ceremony that were emailed to me, it said something along the lines of 254 registered users. I wondered if you could explain what that means.
Sure. With respect to your NTIA question and also Kevin's question on NTIA, there are a few points that I can share, and that is that we were informed that NTIA was not moving ahead with a solicitation, as is. We have been invited to have a debriefing with them to learn more about this. And we will be having that discussion with them. And following that discussion, we will share any information that we're allowed to share from that briefing. So that's my comments on that. I cannot comment about your question on the line about whether we have submitted another bid. No comment on that right now. And then your second question, I'm sorry, can you remind me again?
Sure, it had to do with the number of applicants you're seeing thus far with the GTLD application.
Thank you for the reminder. Yes, so the application process has a two-step process. You first have to register as an applicant to be identified in the system and to be approved as a valid applicant with some verification before we move to the next step of allowing you to file specific applications for strings. So the first stage is basically to verify your institution, who you are, and to have that recognized. The second stage is a specific applications for strings. The number that we have presented is the number of parties that have registered themselves in the system. And each of those registrations is allowed to apply for up to 50 strings under that application of their entity. Akram, is there any clarification you'd like to offer to that? And another fact for the gentleman from Nigeria I wanted to share, since I have colleagues in the room, is that the exact head count at ICANN today is 141 full-time staff. We have hired some number in the last couple of weeks. And as I mentioned, we also have open positions posted online at ICANN.org, and we encourage people to look at the open positions and to apply for them. Thank you.
Eric, while we have the line open to you, do you have any follow-up question if you're still online?
So just so I understand correctly, so 254 parties have registered to apply for new top-level domains, and each one of those could apply for up to 50 top-level domains. Is that right?
That's correct. And individual parties can actually do, I think, separate applications. So it may be less than 254 separate institutions, but there's 254 registrations of entities that each can then apply for 50 strings in the system.
And those you're going to be revealing who applied for what on May 1st, is that right?
Yes, that is the target date that we intend to publish the strings on.
Okay, thank you.
There we go. Let me just add that if you have in mind to do the math and multiply 254 by 50 to get the maximum upper bound, you should also multiply 254 by 0 to get the minimum lower bound. No requirement for anybody to actually submit an application just because they're registered. So the full range is 0 to whatever number you want to compute.
We have another question on the phone from Michelle Quinn, reporter with Politico in San Francisco. Michelle?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Oh, excellent. Thanks for taking my call. I was really interested in Mr. Beckstrom saying that the firm, I think, has enlisted the services of 3 kind of corporate ethicist types. He mentioned their names in his speech, but I just wanted to find out why, what he's hoping them to do, and if you could say their names again. I mean, some of them I recognize, one of them I didn't. So, what's the goal?
Yes, as I mentioned in my speech in Singapore, I felt that as we moved to approving the new GTLD program, we were then closing a door on negotiating many different implementation details and what had been policy details with the community. And we're then going to move into application processing. And given the tremendous potential value of some of those strings, we needed to start separating more clearly the activities of board, community, and staff on an ethics basis to avoid conflicts. Because discussions that may have been appropriate with, say, an applicant who is going to apply for a new GTLD, that discussion may have been appropriate before the final program was approved as a part of the multi-stakeholder process. But as soon as we move to processing applications, we need to keep a very clean line of separation between the staff and new GTLD applicants to make sure that everything was handled fairly and objectively. And so what I had foreseen was increasing pressures on us and increasing calls for us to manage that I thought would be coming, and they did in fact come. The board embraced this, and the board picked this up wholeheartedly in the board governance committee, and they approved a staff recommendation to make significant investments in this area, including using outside expert resources, expert legal resources that we had already, new potential expert legal resources, and new outside ethics experts. There are three names in the speech today. Barbara, you can point to the page. I know it's Mr. German Brooks, who has been associated with Transparency International. Mr. I believe it's Aaron Kramer and Mervyn King are the three world experts recognized who have agreed to work together under contract with ICANN to review our code of conduct and provide us with inputs on the conflict issue. And so the board has supported that. They established a budget for that and approved staff to move ahead, and staff then has proceeded with that assignment.
Michelle, while we've got the line open to you, do you have a follow-up question?
I do. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. So just so I understand, and even though I've been studying ICANN for a year, I'm still a lay person. I'm not among the faithful yet. Is the issue that because of the multi-stakeholder process, people who are stakeholders are also applicants, and people who help make the decisions of ICANN are also applying to be registrars of new domains, top-level domains. So we need to, ICANN is trying to create lines and codes of contact for people in two different roles, both governance and as business people doing business with ICANN. Do I have that right?
Yeah, this is Steve Crocker. At the board level, we have identified very conservatively anybody who actually has a conflict of interest, anybody who has potential conflict of interest, anybody who has the appearance of a conflict of interest, and removed them or asked them not to participate and impose this in any decision related to the new GTLD program. We've tried to put a pretty wide separation so that the issue that you're talking about has a very clean demarcation line. We've gone considerably farther than is usual to go in these situations. One of the absolutely fundamental points of construction about ICANN is that it deliberately was constructed to involve people within the community and to deal with conflicts first and foremost by disclosure and by diversity of people in there. That has been operating quite well for a long time. Given the heightened sensitivity about the GTLD program, we've added additional separation and very detailed disclosure, and totally consistent with trying to avoid conflicts of interest and to keep the process very clean.
My name is Remy Mweke. I'm the editor of ITRAMS Online from Nigeria, Lagos. Mr. Rod, I had earlier asked a question about the application you may have received from African countries on .africa, and I think you probably omitted it in your response, and I would like you to make a clarification on that. The number of applications you have received so far on that. Thank you.
The only data that we're publishing about the application process at this time is the number of parties that register in the system, which is 254. I can tell you that they come from multiple geographies, but we're not giving any breakdown, and we're not discussing any specific names or strings or terms. We will publish all of those for the world to see openly and transparently, with the name of the applicants as well, and the target date for that release is May the 1st.
Hi, Kieran McCarthy here from .next. With respect to that, could you explain what the rationale is that you will not provide what would be really useful statistics, i.e. how many actual applications there are, what category they fit in? What is the rationale to not provide that information?
Obviously, we want to protect the identities of the applicants. We don't want to get into disclosing the strings themselves. There was, some discussion on the inside, and one of the reasons we're not publishing the number of specific applications for the strings is we neither wanted to be seen to be encouraging nor discouraging parties to apply for new GTLDs. That really should be an independent decision based on their view of what adds value to their own organization. So that's number one. Number two, we also felt that it's very likely that many of the applications might come in towards the end of the period, or at least that's what parties had told us. So even if we were to publish the number of strings applied for right now, or those individual applications, it might not be a very meaningful number.
I sort of feel obliged to give the counter argument to that, which is this information would be very useful for applicants. And ICANN is built around, as you know, being transparent and accountable. So if the reason to not provide what would be really useful information is that it may have an impact that we don't know whether it would or would not have an impact, wouldn't it logically be ICANN's position that we will provide the information about the process that is ongoing, rather than we'll withhold the information for a perceived risk of something happening?
Sure. Another related issue, Kieran, is that the fees are not paid until the end. So it's not clear that it's really an application for a string until it's completed and all funds have been received, which we anticipate will be towards the end of the window. Whereas with the registrations for the individual entities, I believe that there's a small upfront fee that's paid of is it $5,000, Akram? Yes, of $5,000. So it's a little bit different in terms of what the data might represent.
We have an online question from an independent reporter in London, and this is directed to you, Dr. Crocker. He said, can you please elaborate on what future measures the board will consider in improving ethics and conflicts of interest situations?
We're going to have a session during this week on what the state of affairs is and what we're considering. I don't want to get ahead of that. As I've already said, we take this very seriously. I don't know how well it's appreciated how strong the conflict of interest rules and execution of those rules, adherence, had been in place and has been in place for many years. Every director is required to file a statement of interest, a conflict of interest statement that is reasonably comprehensive, and those are on file. They're reviewed by appropriate people, balancing privacy of the process with a thorough examination. And as I also had said, that one of the ways of dealing with conflict, besides having people recuse themselves when specific issues come up, is to make sure that all potential conflicts, apparent conflicts, and actual conflicts are on the record, visible, and and then we avoid big obvious problems. We don't put Bruce Tonkin is our sort of primary exemplar of somebody who is very much in the industry, handles himself with incredible grace and skill, and has never tried to use his position to influence anything, and is first to remove himself from any conversation if there's an issue. We expect and we get, I would say, a very, very high level of behavior, best behavior from people. So that said, I think we have a very strong base that we're working from. And then given the heightened concern, we're not at all afraid to go back and see if there's other things that we might be able to do. And we are open to suggestions, but we also try not to spend all of our time worrying about this so we actually get some work done.
And just building on Steve's good words there, the board created a subcommittee under the board governance committee this last year specifically on conflicts and ethics. So it's a conflicts and ethics subcommittee, and all of the board members on that committee are non-conflicted. And I think that was an important and valuable step that the board took.
Kevin Murphy again. Rod, you mentioned earlier that ICANN's expecting a great many applications to be filed towards the end of the window, and from what I gather, a lot of these will be brand applications, and a lot of them are waiting until the last minute to kind of pull the trigger on these applications. There's obviously a limited number of application consultants and registries out there. They're probably facing this kind of end-of-window bottleneck of to process these applications for the deadline. Meanwhile, ICANN's also got a timing issue with the Olympic/Red Cross issue. I was wondering, with those two things in mind, is there any chance that the application window will be extended, or are the March 29th and April 12th dates set in stone?
We're not specifically forecasting that the applications will come last minute because we're not forecasting behavioral patterns or specific numbers. But we do hear from different community members that they anticipate that. So that's more of a reflection of what we hear than of any decision-making process on our part. I can say at the present time, and Steve can further clarify, but certainly the executive, in my role as CEO, I would never extend the application window without a decision from the board. And my sense is, quite clearly the board is not moving in that direction right now, but that's really for Steve to speak to. So at the present time, we firmly intend to close the application window on April 12th, and we presently intend to announce the strings on May the 1st. And with respect to the IOC and Red Cross issues, Steve can fill us in there as well. There was a healthy discussion with the GNSO Council yesterday, and those are ongoing discussions this week. Steve?
Yeah, I'll just comment on the first part of it. Lots of work has gone into preparation of this process. Rod and his team have done a lot of work, have made very thorough presentations to the board. The board has approved the plan that's in place and have no interest in second-guessing. In fact, we're completely supportive of the whole process. As a general principle, once you commit to putting a plan in place and executing it, every argument that says, well, we got, what about this, and can you extend this, has to be looked at in the light of, and who would be displaced if you undid the plan that's in place, because an awful lot of people are dependent upon the current schedule. We don't really have any indication that there's a sufficient reason to change the schedule. Queries come once from a few sources. We have no proposal that we are actively working on that would cause that to be changed at the moment. We continue to be open to receiving communications and will be responsive to them. But I think that the message ought to be understood that the application window will close April 12th, and May 1st, I believe, is the intended disclosure of the applications. That's a relatively short time. This process is moving forward.
With respect to the Olympic and Red Cross issue, I think you indicated yesterday that the board will not be voting on that this week, even if the GNSO Council does. Does this mean that what's in the applicant guidebook now concerning those marks is what's going to be applicable come April 12th?
I guess I want to separate a couple of issues. I don't want to comment on whether there will be any change or not, although from my previous remark, you can understand that there's a strong orientation toward keeping things as they are. But there was a conditionality in our original support for those marks. My comment about the vote for this week was really one that is procedural, in that having been on the board for a long time in different capacities and having watched the operation, the pattern of bringing something into the ICANN week, having it go through some public comments and or committees, and then trying to present it for a vote on Friday of that week is a flawed process, because it leads to a hasty and incomplete process. It leads to very late night drafting sessions. It's not the way to do business. We're in the process of trying to grow up, and one of the ways of growing up is to be orderly about doing things. So my comment about not voting on this week was really limited to just not being hasty about these things. When, if and when there is something to vote on, and that it's brought to maturity, it's reasoned and documented and so forth, we have no trouble bringing it before the board reasonably rapidly.
Also, forgive my rudeness, I wanted to introduce our Vice President for Latin America, Rodrigo de la Parra, over at the end over here. If you're local reporters, you may want to make contact with Rodrigo afterwards. He's a great source. And we have a question right now on the phone from Washington, D.C., from Lynn Stratton. Lynn, can you tell us what news organization you're with, and then go ahead and ask your question?
Sure. I'm with Telecommunications Reports, and thank you for taking my question. I've actually got two questions. First, what's the procedure if multiple entities apply for the same string in the new GTLD process? And secondly, could you elaborate a little bit on ICANN's role going into the ITU event in Dubai in December, whether you are taking positions or anticipate taking positions on issues to be discussed, and whether you'll actually have a seat at the table in any sense?
Lynn, we're having a little bit of a hard time understanding you. Did you get it, Rod?
I think I got it. Let me try to summarize what I believe your two questions were, and you can confirm or edit that. I believe your first question was about what happens if multiple parties apply for the same string in the new GTLD program. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. And your second question is about what is the role of the ITU vis-a-vis other organizations like ICANN?
The role of ICANN in this ITU process in Dubai in December.
Okay, it's something about the ITU processes and?
In Dubai in December.
Okay, in Dubai. Thank you very much. Sure. Yes. Okay, so first, with respect to the process for handling what we call string contention, or when there's multiple applicants for the same string, that consumed about 6 years of community discussion and debate, and so there's some very elaborate protections and processes in the program to determine which party wins if there are multiple applications, all of which are valid. So to summarize that in a very simple sense, the first thing is there's two types of applications. There's community applications and all other applications, which we call standard. So community versus standard. If you're a community group, for example, the chief of the Zulu tribe sent me a letter expressing interest in .Zulu. Well, that's a tribe, that's a people, a community. They could choose to file that if they wished as a community application. On the other hand, a company filing for its company name or a brand name would have to file a standard application. If there is a community and standard application for the same string, and both applicants pass all the other hurdles, such as the background checks, the financial checks, technology checks, etc., then the community string gets priority or takes precedence. So communities are favored over all other applicants. That's one rule. Then there's other rules that relate to things such as trademarks. So if two parties are businesses that both apply under a standard application, if one owns the trademark and one doesn't, then the rights holder takes precedence. And then there's also a whole set of objections for parties as well. I'm not mentioning here that for any different reason, parties can object to these applications, either in the open objections process or in specific objections processes. So, but I know you don't want more than that. Len, we'd be happy to introduce you to someone on staff who could discuss this in more detail if you would like. With respect to your second question about the ITU meetings, the regulatory meetings in Dubai this December, I believe. That's to discuss certain regulatory frameworks and guidance that the ITU has. And some of those things may relate to ICANN, but most of them pertain to activities that the ITU does that I won't speak to. It's really for the ITU to speak to their role and their function. What we know our role and function is about is three things: domain names, network addresses, and the protocol and parameter registries of the Internet, which the latter we publish on behalf of the Internet Engineering Task Force. And the domain name system connects domain names with IP addresses. We're involved with that. But basically, we're involved in three things: domain names, IP addresses, and protocol and parameter settings for the Internet. And I hope that's helpful. And again, Lynn, we're happy offline to go deeper on either of these issues. Also want to mention, if any of the journalists want the spelling for the names of the ethics experts, we're happy to either share that now or afterwards. Please reach out to Brad or Barbara. We're happy to give you the spelling of those names.
Hi, Kieran McCarthy. Next. At the last meeting in Dakar, the I suppose headline situation was when the GAC got very exercised about changes to the Registrar Accreditation Agreement, and this set off a fast track, a strong board resolution and a fast track discussion to reach changes. And during the course of that, the deadline that ICANN put out there was that you would provide a new RAA for public comment on the 15th of February. But not only was that deadline missed, but we still don't have any new text at all, and the GAC was asking for that text yesterday. So my question is, what are the reasons that you weren't able to reach that deadline, and sort of who is responsible for making sure you reach deadlines? And then what's the timeline for resolving this? How are you going to resolve it? And if it hasn't worked this time, what's the belief that you will reach an end point in a short period of time?
Speaking from the board perspective, the questions that you've asked are the questions that the board is asking of the staff. So I think I'm going to actually just simply channel your questions directly over to our CEO and have him deal directly with that. We are watching this process closely. I think in fairness, those were, no matter what the words we used about whether it was commitment or whether it was deadlines, it was certainly not within the power of any single party to force results by a certain date. So there was this strenuous effort, and those were goals that were taken quite seriously, not casually. But to take your question quite literally and ask the classic questions of you didn't make it, when are you going to do it, and how are you going to know that you're going to do it there? Those are fair questions. They cause us quite a bit of anxiety and desire to reach closure on this. Would you like to add to that, Ron?
Sure. As I mentioned briefly in my speech, we feel progress has been made on 11 of the 12 requests by law enforcement with respect to, I'm sorry, excuse me, that's referring to the WHOIS, the RA process is separate, excuse me, I was conflating the two for a second. What I can offer, Kieran, is that one of the people at the negotiating table from our side is in the room, JJ, John Jeffrey. If you would like John Jeffrey to provide more detail, I think he'd be happy to.
That's a good question. We've made significant progress, we think, and we believe that there is good faith at the negotiating table from the registrars. We've held a series of meetings with the registrars. Literally hundreds of hours on both sides has been put into the negotiations so far. We think that the progress that's been made leads us to believe that there is still a possibility of reaching a resolution from those negotiations. And in light of that, we believe it's worth continuing to proceed down that path. Now, that won't be an open window to continue that forever. We'll try to set a timeline limit on that this week. We've also had direct meetings with GAC members, registrars in the room, and we've invited community comment on the recent summary that was posted of where the negotiations have gone so far.
My name, once again, is Remy. I think I would like the VP from Asia to share for us what he's bringing to the table, as I'm sure he has resumed fully now. Yeah, what I bring into ICANN from your own perspective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm been involved in ICANN for a long time. First working as the GAC representative for Mexico, and I'm trying to bring that experience into ICANN, being involved both at the side of the government and also involved with the community. And one of the main objectives of having regional VPs is to be closer to the different stakeholders of the region needs and try to get ICANN closer to them, and also them to ICANN, to make them participate in all constituency groups and make them be part of the decision-making processes in ICANN.
And Remy, if I can build upon that, since I'm the one with the executive management team that promoted Rodrigo to the vice president position. And I should mention that all hiring decisions and major transition decisions on the executive team of ICANN have been made as consensus decisions of the entire executive management team. So while I would reserve the right as CEO to make a final decision, I never have. I've always made the decision with the team and allowed the team to move to a decision. Rodrigo earned this promotion by being an outstanding performer. An example of that is that when the Costa Rica minister, Alejandro Cruz, wished to organize a ministerial meeting here on Friday with ministers from across Latin America, he was able to turn to Rodrigo only a few months ago and have Rodrigo help organize the entire successful event, bringing many new governments into discussions with ICANN who had not previously spoken with us. And I heard informally from talks after the successful ministerial meeting, for example, that at least one, if not more, additional countries were now interested in joining the ICANN Governmental Advisory Committee. And Rodrigo has demonstrated such excellence in everything that he's worked upon. He was also supported by the leaders of the community who you saw on the stage today, Raul Echevarria and Hartmut Glaser, who both gave him very high recommendations and support for the position. And the reason we created the regional vice president positions was that ICANN's role in the world continues to evolve, and it's important to very large corporations and many governments at high levels. And we felt that rather than coordinate that centrally from a place like the United States, the senior leadership should be in the regions of the world, and ICANN has 5 regions. So that's the rationale, and we're really thrilled to have Rodrigo taking on that role and responsibility, as well as Dr. Xiaodong Li in Asia, and as well as Nigel Hickson, who just started today as Vice President of Europe.
We're going to close with that. Thank you.